Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Elisabeth, how are you this afternoon?
Good. How are you, Ted?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you spending a few minutes with me today. And how we got connected was you were a contributor to, I call it the KM&I handbook. That's not the official name, but for those that are on YouTube, it's the Knowledge Management and Innovation, a manual for law firms and other legal services by PLI. And Patrick Dundas was the main author, but there were 47 contributing authors, of which you were one, and you had a chapter on knowledge assessments and developing a KM strategy, and our audience is very much KM&I folks, so I think it'll be a good conversation. But before we get into that, why don't we get you to introduce yourself? You're doing some interesting work at DLA, and you've been all over Aiken Gump, King and Spalding, Clifford Chance. So tell us what a little bit about your background and what you're doing today.
Sure. So I'm Elisabeth Cappuyns, and I'm currently the Director of Knowledge Management at DLA Piper for the US part of the firm. And maybe I'll just start with where I originally was practicing was as a corporate lawyer, a variety of different practices, usually M&A, PE, so private equity, securities and capital markets, depending on the market and where I was. Because I've had the opportunity while I was practicing for about 15 years to work both in New York and in London and in Abu Dhabi, which I thought was really interesting to be able to move around with that practice as a background. But then about 10 years ago, I was ready for a different challenge. And so I had the opportunity, I kind of fell into knowledge management, like I think many of us have. I was able to take on the role of a KM attorney focused on M&A. So that's how I got my introduction into KM. Really enjoyed it. It was, I would say, one of the earlier days still of technology finally starting to mature on the legal side of things. Obviously, a lot had happened in other industries, but there were some tools to actually, work on and try to incorporate in workflows. So I started doing some of that. But then about almost 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to join DLA to really kickstart their KM program there, which became part of our knowledge department, which has a few other teams in it as well. So that's what we've been doing. We've been working on the KM strategy and plan, starting with the assessment at DLA Piper for all the practices. It's a large firm, so that means that there's a lot of practices and subgroups to cover. I think it's over 30 subgroups at this point. And I think that in order for KM to be useful, it really has to be tailored and targeted towards the practice of the attorneys. And so that's been one of the challenges, trying to really cover as many of those bases as you can. And, that's what we've been working on. We'll get into this more, but obviously KM has core components, but also a lot of technology components. And that's been a big part of what we've been doing so far as well.
Well, okay, so this was a very relevant topic then that you wrote on in the book, because it sounds like you're just going through this again at DLA. So tell us a little bit about the contents of the chapter and why someone would be interested in the information that you're presenting there.
So again, it's one of those, or two really, of the foundational blocks of a KM program, the KM assessment and then the KM strategy and plan. And the reason why I think it's important is because in order for a KM program to actually be successful, it really needs to be tied to the business goals of the organization. In this case, a law firm. I think many of you, a law firm as well. And so in order to understand what those goals are, you need to understand where you are currently. That's where the assessment comes in. And then where do you want to go? And that's where the strategy and the plan comes in. So that was certainly one of the first things I did when I joined DLA. It was basically to figure out what the pain points were, where the needs were, what was already in existence, because it's always interesting to find out like what's already in place, what's been tried and maybe failed, what's planned, who's interested in this, who are the actual target audiences and groups, and basically just work through that to get an idea of where you are. It's also helpful as a benchmark or a baseline to then compare progress to over time and to get a sense of the culture. It was a really good way for me to talk to a lot of different people. Everybody picked up the phone, which was great, across the business practices and the attorney side as well. So it's really just a very nice place to really get started. But that brings up another point. When should you actually do one of these assessments? And so for me, it was both a new function and I was new in the role. So those are two good triggers. But I would say that it's also helpful to do it when there's new leadership in a group or even in a firm, because they might have different objectives that you want to understand. And then just in general, it could be helpful. And I think, in fact, a KM team should reassess their own strategy and plans from time to time as well. So I don't know if you want to go into a little bit more detail about what an assessment itself looks like.
Well, so the first question that popped into my mind is the size and scale of DLA, and it sounded like you're doing this in broad brushstrokes. So the last ILTA list I have, it looks like you guys are 4,000 plus attorneys. Is that accurate?
That's worldwide, yes.
Okay.
And in the US, it's about 1,700, but still not a small size firm.
Still massive, yeah. So, so the first thing that comes to mind is just how, 1,700 attorneys, you're probably close to 4,000 total headcount for a firm that size, and conducting a survey. Tell us logistically how that plays out.
Yeah. So logistically, you can't talk to everybody. So you try to find the point people that might get you the furthest along the fastest. And it also, the size affects what you can actually do in reality. But in terms of the people that I targeted, and I'd been in some practice management roles as well, so I knew the importance of practice management, the other parties that are all tangentially related to what happens in KM, and that is IT, InfoGov, InfoSec, etc., like business development and marketing. They all know a lot about the firm and the practices specifically and what they see the pain points are. So that is frankly where I started. The other departments that support a lot of the attorneys' work to understand whatever they could tell me that they saw as concerns and to learn about the practice itself. Like, what are the strategic plans for this group or for another group? Why are these subgroups part of that group, etc.? Understand as much as you can. And then when you start going to the attorneys, you start with leadership. In general, I reached out to leadership, and either they talk to me directly or they would tell me to talk to somebody else as like a proxy for them. To start getting that buy-in and that feedback. At least it shows that you've done your homework and you've tried to get as much information as you could. And from there on out, and this is actually part of the planning too, you also talk to whoever's interested in this and enthusiastic. I mean, as you reach out to people, as there might be announcements about, what's happening at the firm, people reach out as well and they want to learn more. And that can be a very helpful foothold to then learn more about what that actual person or practice needs and support that need, but also become a showcase for something that can happen later on. So it's a mix of different things. A lot of individual calls. You can, if you want to, I did this a little bit less early on, but we do it more now, do focus groups. That's another option. And then surveys are an option. Frankly, I find them, I would love for people to respond to them, but it's very hard to get a good response rate that's reliable. So while we still use them, we try to just have as much personal contact as we can and talk to the groups as much.
Yeah, it seems like a massive undertaking. How long did the assessment portion of your journey at DLA, how long did that take?
Well, it's ongoing. The initial one, I would say, was certainly a couple of months because we were also, we were a new department at the time and we were trying to come up with our own brand and vision itself, which is something we worked on together as well. And that involves our knowledge technology colleagues, our research colleagues, and then later on our lit support too. So we tried to bring all of that under a heading that made sense. And as part of that, we came up with a motto, a brand of helping our attorneys practice smarter, which is our main goal in a lot of different ways. And so that initial assessment helped us, granularly with the specific projects to support that. But it's ongoing. And now, if you think back to the timing as well, I joined in the fall of 2019. 6 months into this, COVID started.
Oh boy.
Really affecting everybody's work. And so that meant that all of a sudden everything was remote on top of everything else. And so a lot of the meetings that we've been having, etc., went in a very different format. So whatever we had done initially, we had to continue to do, but also adjust for the new work environment that we had. So like I said, it's definitely months, and we came up with a game plan to get started because you can't keep assessing and not doing anything, right? Like you need to at least get started on some projects, and I'll get to your point about scale in a second. But on an ongoing basis, you keep readjusting and you keep going back to what you need to do. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Wow. So when you say this is ongoing, is this like the painting the Golden Gate Bridge where, it's a 4-year cycle when they get to the end, they start back at the beginning and it never stops. I mean, is it that sort of an exercise?
It's a little less linear, I would say. I think we kind of go a little bit more with what happens out there. And, Gen AI, which I know we'll talk about more as well, was certainly a big driver in how we focused on certain things more than other things than we planned. That was especially true for last year. When we had a game plan for 2023, and I think by January 2nd, it was clear that we were not going to necessarily follow that game plan and come up with other ones. So it's an ongoing assessment in the sense that you look at the needs, we understand the needs better than we did before. Things change as well, of course, like there's new practice groups, there's no strategic goals. We're part of those strategy meetings to understand what the strategy of these practices and subgroups are. And you keep adjusting on an ongoing basis that way. It's not that, okay, it's December 15, let's look at our plan and then start it again on January 1st. You can do that, and you probably should, but it's much more flexible and dynamic than that, I would say. And to some extent, technology might drive certain use cases over others, and the goals of the firm will drive that too. And so as they make changes, as they create new practice groups, or they might get new groups in, that might mean that we have to focus on that in a different way than we thought. So it's dynamic.
Okay, that makes sense. And then what can you tell us about the structure of the CAM function at DLA US? Are you combined with innovation? Do you have a CKIO? Do you just have a CKO? Is innovation separate? Again, any details you can share about the size of the team and so forth?
Yeah, so we have a chief knowledge officer. We don't have I in her title or in our titles. Frankly, I think everybody should innovate all the time. I don't know if that needs to be a separate thing. So there was a small innovation group that now sits with us under KT as well, KT being knowledge technology. But so within that knowledge department, we have the KM group, which is my group. We have knowledge technology, which supports us on the onboarding and logistics of the more practice type specific legal tools. Foundational tools are run by IT, of course. Then we have that research group that I mentioned, which was all our analysts that do the typical research you would expect a team like that to do. But a lot of that, of course, has ongoing technological advances too. So that's an ongoing process for them. And then our lit support team. And that's largely because, of course, they do their own e-discovery work. But we realized that our e-discovery database was actually a really good place to put KM projects. So we started working with them before they became a part of our department, because there was a lot of functionality there that we could use for our own KM purposes. And we've really kind of pushed some of the limits of what that's intended for. But it's a good workhorse database with a lot of things that we like and have introduced for different projects. So that's our general department.
Interesting. And so what I've seen in my observations, I've been selling into this market for a number of years, and we've done business with more than half the AmLaw. So I've had an interesting kind of cross-sectional view to see how different firms really are when it comes to KM. There are many firms that don't even use the words knowledge management because there's culturally lack of understanding, resistance, or not full buy-in on ROI or various cultural factors, and they call it something else. And what I noticed is you said KT, knowledge technology. Mm-hmm. So is that's a subgroup within knowledge management, or is that
within the knowledge department? Yeah, so they have more of a tech background, and they've run pilots and trainings and that type of thing, and so they understand the underlying needs of onboarding a technology that we need, a new tool, working with a vendor through the procurement process, and then the actual implementation. And then where we work very closely is that on the KM side, we do the substantive use case applications, examples, etc. So we have the legal background. Almost everybody on my team is a lawyer. And then they have more of the tech background and some innovation, piloting, training background as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, a big function of KM isn't really KM at all. It's being kind of the glue, almost the business analyst between the practice or practices and technology. And, you guys understand the use cases and the implications much better than folks on the tech side of the organization typically, and especially in the bigger firms. And you kind of act as that translator. So it sounds like you have a group within knowledge focused specifically on that.
Yeah, so they certainly do a heavy part of that, but we on the KM side work with both the vendors as well and IT, et cetera, to just layer on as much of the expertise we need in order to get the best results. But you're absolutely right. I think KM functions, knowledge functions are definitely that bridge, that translation between the attorneys and technology. And I would actually say that these days, to some extent, even more so between leadership and attorneys in their daily practice, because you want to make sure that you translate that as well in a way that, again, supports those goals. So we're really kind of, I always feel like we're kind of in the middle of a lot of different things that are happening within a firm, within the business and the practice of the firm. And we try to pull it together as well as we can.
Yeah. I got to be careful how I say this, but, we sell to primarily knowledge management and innovation teams, but IT is a key stakeholder. And I come from a technology background, so I don't mean this in any negative way, but what I've seen is that a lot of the recommendations when they originate out of IT, a lot of times fail to have sufficient context. For example, we're an intranet, extranet platform, and we are legal specific, so we only do business with law firms, not corporate counsel, not any other industry. So we know this space really well. In fact, we've been doing this since 2008. And I've seen recently recommendations from IT that seem to be driving the bus, and these are at bigger firms where they'll say, "Hey, we use ServiceNow, so ServiceNow has an intranet platform. Why don't we use that?" And it's like, ServiceNow has no integrations with any of your back office, your document management system, your practice management system. But in a lot of firms, depending culturally on the dynamic, sometimes IT has a lot of influence. And from a, purely technology standpoint, what they're saying makes sense, right? Hey, we already have a platform. Let's see if we can leverage it. But if you look at it, through the lens of the end users, there's just not that there. Another kind of odd one that's been popping up lately is Microsoft has been beating the drum of, you can do this natively, like with out of the box. You can build an intranet natively with out of the box tools, and you can't. It's the integrations aren't there. So we're very thankful for our KM&I folks who pop up and go, "Whoa, wait a second, wait a second. How are we going to build a matter page or a client page or a knowledge bank that integrates with our document management system, or attorney profiles that pulls from experience management and HRIS and billing rates from our PMS? How are we going to do that?" And I don't know if this is true in your experience. It looks like you've worked at a lot of bigger firms, but what I've seen, it's around 300 attorneys seems to be the threshold where the presence of knowledge management seems to go up quite a bit. Below that 300 attorneys, and I'm just using that number, maybe it's 250, maybe it's 400, whatever. In that range, I'm seeing a lot more formal knowledge management functions above that. I don't know if you've worked in that smaller mid-law space, and if so, has that been your observation?
So I've only been in the bigger firms, like I would say probably 700, 800 and up from there on the attorney side. That said, I think it is nice to have that KM function in order to support the bigger groups, because there is so much to work with, and to have that bridge and that translation and that ambassador between the various parts of the firm that need to work together for the attorneys to do their job. Because that's ultimately what we're all trying to do, is right, to have our practicing attorneys have as much support as they need in order to advise their clients. And so I think that's probably why you're seeing that it's more the bigger firms that have the KM functionality. I'm just not as familiar with the smaller ones, frankly.
Yeah,
there might be some there as well.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to beat up on the IT guys. Like I am one, but they a lot of times it's just resource and budget in the smaller firms. They just don't have. So the IT folks have to wear a lot of hats. But I'm seeing even at bigger firms, like 1,000 attorney plus firms, where IT is I guess leading some of the conversations, which is a great segue into our next topic, which we were going to talk a little bit about Gen AI and where decision making happens. And I was fortunate enough to moderate a rockstar panel a few weeks ago at a Inside Practice conference with Meredith Williams and Christy Bentz from Norton Rose and Peter Giovannis from McGuire Woods, and we explored the topic like, hey, where does decision making, risk tolerance, all that sort of stuff live in the org? Is it KM? Is it innovation? Or are we going to carve out a separate function? Like, what's your perspective on where you see those functions living in the legal org structure?
Well, it depends on the firm, I think. And I've seen a lot of different formats and streams and decision-making functions. And a lot of it depends, like you said, on whether there is a KM or innovation function or not, and how mature it is or how far along in the journey they are. At our firm decided to be a pace setter in this. Actually, a while ago, they had an AI practice on the legal practice side of things many years ago. And they've been advising clients on a range of different topics, from policymaking and governance and protecting AI rights, etc. And then we've more recently, in the last year plus, added additional talent and expertise on the data science front, engineering, coding, etc. So now they can do additional work there for meeting some of the client needs too. But so that's been a part on sort of what we can offer the clients directly. But similarly, we were one of the earlier firms that really adopted some of those Gen AI tools that came out in the last year and a half. We've been on the KM side, we've been in there testing, trying out Gen AI tools for a year and a half now. So we've been in it for quite some time. And I would say that the focus on the KM, the knowledge side of things, is really those third-party vendor tools that are directly applicable to our attorneys' practice, which is kind of where the other technology that we generally work with sits, right? Like it's the document automation tools, the deal management tools, some of the data analytics tools, the stuff that an attorney would need in order to advise their clients. So that's how it's sort of organized on our side of things. And we work together a lot. We have regular calls. We talk to each other about the needs, the gaps, the opportunities, the functionalities, because obviously we're all in that Gen AI space. But that's how it's been organized so far at our firm. But
Interesting.
With the general push from senior leadership that we think that this is something that we need to, be aware of, conversant in, have our lawyers be familiar with it so they can make that a part of their practice and, have that be a part of whatever the clients might need.
So who makes the final decision? So you guys explore new tools and make a recommendation. Who says, yes, we will bless this tool and buy it and roll it out? Like where does that decision, is that the XCOM, or does that happen in KM or IT?
It depends on the tool and the budget and the pricing of the tool. And then there's a recommendation process and approval process that's part of that. So again, it depends a bit on the details of the exact thing. But KM has sort of the focus on those third-party tools versus our AI team that would be more on the potential building side of tools. So that's a different approach there.
Yeah. And I have not watched it, but I saw that you did a presentation at Skills on DLA's commitment to being a pace setter in the generative AI space. What drove that? I'm seeing a lot of variations. I think all law firms understand the implications and that there needs to be some level of awareness, but I'm seeing a lot of variation in risk taking and investment. What really was the driver with DLA's trying to be on the cutting edge of this?
Because they had been involved and advised on AI for many years, right? Like I mentioned, we'd had the practice for quite some time. I think leadership, we saw the potential and the opportunity there. So we wanted to make sure that we got in early enough so we can become as familiar with and as expert in this, and thereby our attorneys as well as possible. and be able to both advise the clients in it, but also as they see the effect of what Gen AI does to their business, and the requirements that they're going to have to fulfill, that you can actually, understand it and advise on it. So that was the general driver behind, wanting to be in the front of the pack. And then, frankly, we took quite a bit of time to test the tools and to roll out in a way that we felt was appropriate. And we actually added a lot of requirements around giving people access to our first Gen AI tool. We required a CLE, an hour-long CLE on the actual technology and the ethical obligations, because this is very new. I mean, this is now last fall, right? So it seems like ages ago, but it was still very new for a lot of people. People hadn't necessarily heard about prompting and context windows and vectorization, etc. So we wanted to make sure that they understood what this was, so they can also understand what it can and cannot do. And then the ethical obligations, of course, are you need to have technical competency, and you need to be able to explain to your client like what you're doing and what you're using. So this is all just part of that education that we're trying to make part of our attorneys' life. And then we also require that they accept our policy on the acceptable use of Gen AI. And then on top of that, whenever there's a new Gen AI focused tool, we require a training on that particular tool. So we wanted to make sure that the education was there, that people are becoming more and more familiar with what this is and isn't. And that continues to be our goal going forward, and our requirement going forward. So that was partly what we discussed at Skills, because I think at that point, not that many firms had tried to roll out anything with that much of a comprehensive plan and onboarding requirements. And we thought it seemed like that was helpful for people to hear.
So was this opt-in or was this mandatory? So let's say I don't want to take the training. I don't want to use the tools. I'm busy.
You don't get access.
Yeah. Okay. So it's optional.
Yes, but that I think is going to probably change, and that's what we're working on, as more and more of our existing platforms and vendors are adding additional Gen AI functionality into what people are using day to day, including the big ones, right? Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, they're all adding this Gen AI functionality. And then we still have the same requirements, right? We need to make sure that people understand what they're now using that is new, which is very different from what they've been doing for a very long time. So that's that next set that we need to work on. All the existing platforms that now have this built in or are building it in, and how do we make sure that everybody understands that?
What sort of pushback are you getting? Attorneys don't like to be told what to do.
No, it's... They don't. And we actually have heard that a little bit, and we'll continue to get some pushback. But I will say that Gen AI is probably the technology where we've had less pushback and more openness than any other technology that we have tried to implement at a firm. In fact, it actually opened up a lot of conversations with attorneys that would come to us and say, hey, I have this problem. I think Gen AI can help me. And very often the answer was, no, it's actually not Gen AI that can help you. It's something as simple as document automation or data analytics or a news alert that's going to help you. But it's great that you're coming to us, because now we can show you all the other options and tools that we have, much more mature, not necessarily as complicated, that can help you. And then you still have that interest in a Gen AI tool going forward. And, by all means, go ahead, go through the plan and make sure that you start learning how to use it. But at the same time, it was a really nice, good conversation starter for us. And that is unusual, because you're right. Most attorneys don't like to be told what to do. And a lot of them are not all that interested in changing their habits.
Exactly. Yeah. Just send them the Goldman report. If they get pushed, if you get pushback, exactly. And then, on as far as opting in, and then you get pushback on the training, was it Schwartz? Was that the case with the false?
That's one of them. He was the first big one. Yeah. So there's amazingly, it's one thing to be the first one, right? It's amazing that there's several after that that have been doing the same thing.
It really is. There's no excuse really for any of it.
No. And that's part of the ethical obligations that we all have as attorneys. You need to check the work, just like you would check an associate's work or other technology work. You need to check the work of what comes out of here too. But that's also why it's so important to understand how it works and why it does what it does, or doesn't do what it can't do yet, and the potential for how that's going to change. So the educational, leap is enormous, and I think we're all going to be in that for quite some time.
Yeah. Well, you speak on these topics from time to time. I don't know if you've touched on this topic in particular with respect to Gen AI, but it is going to affect law firm economics in a very fundamental way for example, leverage, if you can perform the same amount of legal work with fewer attorneys, that is especially at the lower ranks, which I think that's where the biggest impact of Gen AI is going to take place. How can that not affect leverage, right? Unless you have a unlimited supply of new legal work in your pipeline, and I don't know anybody who has unlimited opportunity there, right? Otherwise, we just keep growing and growing. But how do you see these tools impacting in that regard? What do you have you looked out a year or two down the road to kind of think about how fundamentally both the practice and the economics, law firm economics, will differ?
We're certainly talking about it and thinking about it because I think, yes, you're right. There's lots of implications, both on the possibly positive side, like where you can do margin improvement projects and profitability improvement projects on AFAs, for example, by using technology. And then also on the, what does this mean to the business model, the pricing model, etc. I would also be surprised if there weren't some changes on that. But at the same time, and I agree, I don't think there's an unlimited amount of legal work just floating around and, that's just going to be available. But there does seem to be a need for maybe a combination of attorney and tool type of insights. So if you combine the two, you can do more and better work faster. That right now is not possible with just people. And on top of that, the world is not getting any less complex, right? So we're going to have ongoing new regulations, requirements, compliance, and other kind of new legal work that's going to come down the pipe as well. So I don't have the answer, but it's certainly something that we should all talk about and think about, and I think we are. But I think there's a mix of implications that we need to consider there, and then continue to be flexible in how we address them. It seems like we're very much... Last year was sort of like the introductory period of like, what does this all mean? I feel like we're in a transition period that's probably going to last a little while. When you say looking 2 years ahead, that seems like a lifetime at this point because things are moving so quickly. So I think we just need to continue to be intentional about what we're doing and what the implications are.
Yeah, I've heard some crazy predictions like AGI by the end of 2025, which would be,
That's
way...
soon.
Yes, very soon and way ahead of initial projections. Who knows if
I've had
that's...
some P-Doom conversations as well. Who knows, right? I think many of us didn't see the original announcement coming either. So who knows what other surprises are in store. And of course, every new model, an updated next-gen model can do things in a way better than what we're seeing, but can also do new things that we hadn't even anticipated. That's one of the big unknowns with this technology, is it's not just linear, right? It just sort of it surprises us in ways that are difficult to anticipate.
Yeah, if you look at the performance on the bar exam from GPT 3.5 to 4, astounding, right? Like I forget the numbers, but I think it was 3.5 was like, in 65 percentile and 4 was 90. Yeah. And I know there's been some challenges to the methodology used there, but whatever the case may be, a significant jump between a 3.5 and a 4. What's the delta going to be between 4 and 5 that's coming next? What is that performance going to look? And when are they going to do it better than any, human on the planet? Like that's where things get really interesting and hard to wrap your head around and make predictions with.
Definitely.
So you had one of the things that we had agreed to talk about was in the pro bono space and how KM and maybe Gen AI. I mean, that's an area where I know in the A to J space, like there is almost an unlimited amount of legal work there to be dealt with. I don't know if that's true across the board, but I know that there is just a massive, massive gap. How do you see KM and AI amplifying what's happening in the pro bono space?
Yeah, so this is something that I think is quite important. As I mentioned, I've been of the opinion for a while now that I do think KM can amplify pro bono efforts regardless of the AI functionality that's out there. But in the past, what we've done is we've tried to support those programs by, consulting with clients on what they needed to do in terms of internet, workflow processes, etc. Putting together resource pages like we would do for any other practice in our law firm as well, making sure it's easy to find the available resources, helping with projects like access to justice projects. There's one in particular, a self-help project, where we're helping to coordinate and come up with a process in the database to actually organize all of those materials. So then, the group that's working on that has an easier time reviewing those. So that's just typical basic KM functionality and know-how and technology that we've been using for pro bono matters for quite some time now. With Gen AI, I think you're right. There's the potential for the gap to get both bigger and smaller. Smaller in the sense that the functionality can really help with some of the tedious, lengthy, huge amounts of files and records that you have to go through in many cases in order to even see if a claim is sustainable or not, or what the medical records are, or the immigration records for asylum cases, whatever it is, like the mass of documents that you need to go through. Gen AI can help with that, possibly with the automation and the submission of files and submissions to courts as well. But there's also the potential that this makes the gap bigger. And it is a huge population that does not have access to legal help. And with the cost of these tools, Gen AI in particular, and the lack of access to the infrastructure in order to be able to use it, I'm concerned that unless we really are, again, intentional about this and we try to make sure that all the relevant parties work together, the gap could just get bigger. And it would be really nice. And so I would really encourage all of our KM colleagues to work with their pro bono departments if they don't already. Work with the vendors. It's one of the questions that I ask our vendors now. Like, have you worked on pro bono? Is that something you'd be willing to work on with us for these tools, the Gen AI tools in particular, to see if they can help with either, the functionality, the storage space, the processing speeds, like all of that kind of thing. See if we can find ways to then also work with legal aid organizations, court systems, because of course some of them are doing amazing, innovative things. We're having those conversations with some of the courts as well, to see if this isn't really the time for us to try to make it easier for people who don't have access to the lawyers to really kind of get the support that they need in order to get through these really important personal legal issues that are out there.
Yeah, I was
I think
lucky.
there's a lot of potential, but we'll need to kind of get our act together and be coordinated about it, so it works at the different stages of what people need.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to attend TLTF, the Legal Tech Fund conference last year, and I'm going to be attending it again this year. And I will say there was representation there, and it was a lot of Gen AI, but there was a lot of A to J there too. And I think there's a conscious effort within the media to highlight those initiatives and platforms that are making that world better. So I'm hopeful that the investment dollars continue to, because that TLTF is largely a place where you go and learn about new areas potentially to invest. So I'm very hopeful that trend continues. But I guess at the end of the day, time will tell.
Yes, exactly. But you're right. I mean, it would be great to see the investment dollars support these efforts. And to your point, for the media to continue to highlight the success stories, because there are quite a few. And I think it doesn't just give people hope or encouragement to do this too, but it also just allows you to get a sense of what the options are. Because with Gen AI in particular, the options are relatively limitless. Even if the functionality is not there right now, it very well might be in the next release of the next model or the next, version of it. So just thinking about the possibilities, I think, is important. And hearing of other examples is often a part of that, the brainstorming part of it.
In your evaluation of Gen AI tools, were they all legal specific, or did you look at any agnostic, like a Microsoft 365 Copilot?
Mostly legal specific, but we're also very much familiar with using a Copilot, for example. Because, lawyers have a lot of administrative tasks that they need support with too. So that's where those kinds of tools can come in. We also talk with, just from people we run into at conferences and at meetings and everything, but there's just a lot of really smart computer science people at, the Stanfords and the Columbias, and just in general, like what their thoughts are from the computer science side of things, like what the actual functionality can be, and then seeing how that applies to legal attorneys or just sort of the processes that you have. Like there's just a lot of really interesting conversations going there. So we have those more generic kinds of conversations as well. Obviously, ultimately, it needs to support our attorneys, but what our attorneys need goes beyond the purely legal, and so there's definitely an interest in seeing beyond legal.
So you're it sounds like you're focused almost exclusively on practice of law use cases. What about business of law use cases? Your marketing team, your finance team, your HR team, your KM team. What about those use cases? Are they in scope?
They're not out of scope. I would say that they're probably a little bit more secondary, but as we hear suggestions, ideas, hear about functionality, we're certainly open to that. We'd like to do more of that, improve our, functionality and workflows too. But I would say that at least what we do within the knowledge department is definitely focused on the attorneys, and to the extent that the administrative business side of the functionality helps them, then by all means, being able to search and summarize a big set of data in a database that can help anybody, being able to draft an initial, client alert or something like that, that can be super useful too. So it's certainly of interest. The initial focus is still on the actual legal practice. So.
Well, that's where you're going to get the highest ROI, right? The labor costs and the bill rates, the opportunity costs of inefficiencies is the highest in your practice areas. I don't know many people in finance and HR that have $2,000 an hour opportunity costs, right? But it's not uncommon within a practice, so it makes sense. You and I talked, and I know we're running out of time here, but quickly, you were just at ARC National, and I think did I see you and Sarah Miro got to talk?
Sarah was there as well.
Yeah, and you guys were on a
panels, but yes, we were both there.
Yep. And
we were on the same panel, but there were a couple of opportunities there.
Yeah. You were you guys not on the choosing right products for your firm?
That was the one we did together, but there were some other panels that we were on.
Gotcha. So, one of the things I wanted to kind of close with is where all the different places in which information exists. Yeah. For the Gen AI topic specifically, I mean, I told you I've been to 5 conferences already this year. 3 of them were major components. 2 of them were exclusively. They were the Inside Practice conferences, and really good. I was at ILTA's Evolve that was started as LegalSec, which is information security, and then they added on AI. And it had a bit of an IT focus this round. I'm a volunteer with ILTA, and I had, brought up like, hey, in addition to ILTA's, Evolve conference, you've got Inside Practice, you've got ARC, you've got KM&I, AALL has some Gen AI, like it's everywhere. So how they're going to be different, how they're going to differentiate themselves in this very crowded space of content providers, I think is going to be key. But what's you seem to be pretty dialed in to this topic. Where are the best places to learn if you want to learn more?
Well, there's certainly some conferences that I've been going to, or that our team and our department has been going to, that have been very helpful. And so we continue to go to those. Some of those are ARC, Legal Tech Hub, ILTACon, Legal Week. We try to also divide and conquer to the extent we can, because it is too much time to attend everything. So we try to do that way. The newer ones, or the ones that are offshoots from existing ones, we maybe dip in our toes to the extent we can. But it is frankly a challenge because there are so many, first of all. And second of all, a lot of the topics overlap. And so to some extent, it would be nice to maybe take a breath and see where things are in a number of months, which is a lifetime in this space. I get that. But to kind of have new topics, new challenges, new ideas come out. So whenever I end up having a chance talking to somebody organizing one of those, that is usually one of my suggestions. Make sure you don't tie everything down right now with today's topic, because 6 months from now, it might look very different and we might want to talk about something else. and to try to bring a different perspective to it, because we've heard a lot of the current content a lot of different ways. So it is a challenge. I suspect that's part of the transition that we seem to be in right now. And, we'll see where we land. I think the specific use cases are usually helpful. Hearing how people are actually implementing and adopting various tools is helpful. The issues, the bigger picture issues, hearing those discussions can be very helpful too, because I think they're going to continue to evolve. So there's definitely a space for them, but you do need to spend your time wisely. So we'll see where it all shakes out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could literally make that just your entire job is just going to conferences. It feels like that's been my entire job this year so far, but yeah, I mean, it's a dual purpose for us, in addition to learning, it's, we're there exhibiting in some cases, sometimes I speak. So we get a lot of value from it, but it is, thankfully, I'm done. I don't have to get on an airplane for work until ILTACON. And
oh, that's nice. That's a few months.
Yeah. Yes. And you know what? Actually, I'm in St. Louis. It's in Nashville this year, so I could drive if I wanted to. It's about a 4-hour drive. So
right. We'll probably see you there then. So
yeah.
An eye out.
So yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking some time and having a chat. Lots of good information, especially about in the Gen AI space. And, hopefully we can see you again. Are you going to be at ILTACON in Nashville this year?
Yes. That's
awesome.
That's my plan.
Good stuff. Well, we will see you there. And again, thanks for your time, and look forward to seeing you in Nashville.
Sounds great. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.